The broadcast of the special meeting of the Executive Committee will now begin.
Good morning and welcome to this special meeting of the Executive Committee for July 14th, which I called for the purpose of considering my nomination to appoint a new city attorney. My name is Jacob Fry. I'm the mayor of Minneapolis and the chair of this committee. As we begin, I'll note for the record that this meeting has remote participation by committee members and city staff as authorized under Minnesota statute section 13D.021 due to the declared local public health emergency. And at this time, I'll ask that the clerk call the roll so that we can verify a quorum for this meeting.
Councilmember Gordon. Jenkins.
Here.
Johnson. Oh, thank you. Johnson.
Here.
Bender.
Here.
Councilmember Gordon. Mayor Fry.
Here.
There are 4 members present.
Let the record reflect that we do have a quorum and can therefore proceed to the business before us today. Colleagues, our agenda is before us, and so I'll move to adopt the agenda as presented. Is there any discussion or amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Gordon. Jenkins.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Mayor Fry.
Aye.
There are 4 ayes.
That motion carries and the agenda is adopted. That brings us to our discussion item, which, as I mentioned earlier, is the nomination of the city attorney, Jim Router, to the appointed position of city attorney for the current 2-year term, which began on January 2nd, 2020. I will move approval of this nomination, including referral to the matter of the city council. And I'll speak to my nomination first and then open up the discussion to other council members. I first just want to thank the members of the executive committee for making this special meeting today to allow for the appointment of Jim Router. I expect that this meeting will be brief but important, and it was really important for us to call this meeting to ensure we move this important position through our process in a timely manner. Of course, we'll have ample opportunity to discuss the nomination, but I can't leave this morning's meeting without saying how excited I am about this particular nomination of Jim Router after what was a very thorough process. Jim's resume speaks for itself, but I'd encourage you all to reach out and to have a conversation with him directly if you haven't already, and as he moves through the nomination process. As I'll also note that, as I've stated to many of you privately and publicly, I'm really proud of the work that our interim city attorney, Eric Nielsen, has done over the past few months. There have been few city attorneys, whether interim or permanent, that have faced the circumstances that Mr. Nielsen has faced, and he's slugged through even with great difficulty, and we really appreciate him. Eric and the rest of our very bright team in the city's attorney's office will continue to do that hard work, and I know they are really excited to welcome Jim with open arms and a gigantic plate of work. So Mr. Router, get ready. I'll also note that Mr. Router has built his career on a very steadfast commitment to racial equity, to economic justice. And you can see on his resume, he's got decades of experience in the legal field, and a lot of times handling very complex labor and employment matters. And I think both his expertise, his passion, and his compassion will serve him very well. I will save any extended remarks for later, but I wanted to see if there's any discussion from other committee members. Council President Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the function today at Executive Committee is for us to decide whether or not to forward this item to the full council, and then from there the council would decide whether or not to forward the consideration of your nomination to the next Policy and Government Oversight Committee for a public hearing, at which time the council committee would vote whether or not to forward it to the council. So as you alluded to, this is the very beginning of a process that also includes a public hearing and time for council members to, and the public, to voice their priorities or ask questions of you or your nominee, in this case, Mr. Router. I did want to just voice publicly a few areas of priority for me, both as the council member for Ward 10 and in my position as council president. The first is that I think it's important for us to understand how someone coming from a background of more corporate experience will transition into public sector law. And our city attorney's office handles all sorts of different public sector issues. So I think we'll just need to hear in private conversations or in remarks in public, or both, just the approach that Mr. Router would take as city attorney to all the variety of issues that our city attorney's office works on. And in particular, and again, as my role as council president, of interest to me is the way in which the city attorney's office provides legislative support to the city council. So most city councils of our size and cities of our size have their own separate legislative staff, along with attorneys that draft ordinances for the council to consider under the direct direction of the council, but we rely on our city attorney's office for those functions. So it's really important to me that any city attorney be responsive to the direction of policymakers, and that we are able to get prompt and transparent and publicly transparent response to direction around policies, even when we're bumping up against state law. And in the past, we've brought through the city council process and the city process a number of ordinances and policy changes that do just that challenge the power of local governments to govern under state law. Some examples are the Section 8 non-discrimination ordinance, the paid sick time and minimum wage ordinance that, of course, Mr. Router was involved in through his roles on the Workplace Advisory Committee, our inclusionary zoning ordinance, and our renter protection ordinances. And so as we look to the future, I think understanding Mr. Router's approach to the council's direction around these issues of housing stability and renter protection, police reform, and worker protections as some examples of the ways in which the city council and the city of Minneapolis have been leading in the state on policy change. And then the third area is just wanting to learn more about Mr. Router's approach to collective bargaining units. And I know there have been some questions raised publicly about that. I also know that, again, through the Workplace Advisory Committee, that Mr. Router has great relationships with many folks from labor in the city of Minneapolis. But that is something that I will want to learn more about, and I expect we will hear about from the public. So I did have a chance to talk with Mr. Router briefly before this and welcome further conversations on those topics. Again, I just wanted to state here in this venue those three kind of priority areas for me for future conversation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Router.
Sorry, I was on mute. Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Mayor Frey. I do appreciate that you're bringing this nomination for today. And I just wanted to speak a little bit to the interim acting city attorney, Eric Nielsen, and just recognize his efforts during this extraordinarily challenging time in the city's history. He and his team in the city attorney's office has really stepped forward and provided us with the kind of support that seemed relatively seamless, given that, you know, our former city attorney was appointed to a judgeship just right before, you know, all of the sort of unprecedented activities happen within our city and the world. And so just wanted to really highlight and thank Mr. Nielsen for his services to the city. I have not had an opportunity to meet with Mr. Router yet. I'm looking forward to it. That has been scheduled, and so I will reserve my comments until afterwards. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Council Vice President. Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much. I'm glad that the process is done and we now have somebody to consider for city attorney, and appreciate all that hard work. Sorry I was a little bit late to the meeting. Whether or not it's now or later, I'd be a little curious to hear a little bit more about the process, how extensive the search was, maybe who was involved in reviewing the candidates, and sort of how we got here. And I could easily get that offline as well from Mayor's office staff. And I understand that there was a council member included in that process, so I plan to reach out. I think it was Council Member Schrader, to also get his perspective. What I know about Mr. Rauter in terms of when he's presenting and has presented to committees, he's always seemed very professional, very good and articulate, and I think he's hardworking and committed. So I have a good first impression to that degree. I also think some of the resume that I've looked into and some of his past experience looks like it's strong and appropriate. I share a little bit of the concerns when you about somebody coming from the corporate side of things. I'm also concerned about some of the work that he's done pushing back against unions and organizing and workers with Target Corporation. Just wanted to kind of highlight that to give him, and I hope he's listening to this meeting. Too bad he can't be in the room with us, but we're not in a room together either, so there you go. But wanted to put that out there because it is a concern, and I understand there was a pretty big campaign by Target to make sure that the workers couldn't organize, and in his job, he was part of that effort. So I want to understand better about that and dig into that a little bit as well. But I'm comfortable moving forward with the process to send this to the council to give all my colleagues an opportunity to weigh in and for us to set the public hearing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Gordon. Yes, you are correct. Councilmember Schrader was one of the individuals that were on the processing committee. It was an extensive process. We had numerous people both apply as well as be interviewed. We're happy to follow up with you offline to give you a little bit more information as to how that process went. And I'll note that it actually would have come forward probably sooner, but for the state of multiple different emergencies in our city, and given the fact that we wouldn't have the ability to have the new city attorney meet all of the city attorney's office, at the very least in person, for an extended period of time, and given the fact that I wanted Mr. Nielsen to be able to continue to lead through the difficulty, I thought that it was best to at least temporarily postpone until we got through a couple of these issues, and now it's appropriate to move forward. I'll also note that since the announcement of this appointment, I've gotten a number of calls in support, most notably, and perhaps the most ardent supporters were union leaders themselves. So I do strongly encourage you to reach out to union representatives and leadership here in Minneapolis and in the region. Again, the phone calls and text messages I have gotten from union leadership has been universally supported. But I'll let you do your own research on that as well. So what I will do here is I'm gonna, unless there's any further discussion, I'll go ahead and move this item forward. If I haven't already, we'll take a vote, and then if we could just briefly hear from Mr. Rauter. Any further discussion before we call for a vote?
Mr. Mayor, I'll just share the dates of the next
yes.
stuff, if that's okay with you. I just didn't want to interrupt in the next section. So I talked about it at a high level, but just with the dates, July 17th will be the next council meeting. There, the council would decide whether or not to forward it, and that would go to the July 23rd Policy and Government Oversight Committee. At that committee meeting, the members of the committee, which is the whole city council, would vote to set the public hearing, and that would be for August 6th. So if all the steps go with the council voting to forward the items, the public hearing would be on August 6th. And then the final action would be on August 14th.
Thank you, Council President. And based on that timeline, I believe the legal publication and effective date would then be August 22nd for, more of kind of the official start. Any further discussion? Seeing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Jenkins.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Mayor Fry.
Aye.
There are 5 ayes.
That motion carries and the nomination is approved and referred to the City Council for setting of a public hearing at the Council's Policy and Government Oversight Committee. Before we adjourn, I wanted to briefly call on Mr. Rauter in case he wanted to deliver a couple of remarks.
Hopefully, can you hear me? Just want to make sure.
We can.
Great. I just want to express my gratitude and actually my humbleness in being considered for this position. It's something that I have had a passion for doing for quite some time now. As this city has been going through these challenges that are unprecedented, I'm very committed to the city and have been now for a long time, having lived here since 1992 and raised 2 kids through the public schools and now into college. And I just can't tell you how excited I would be to have this opportunity to give back and really deliver in any possible way that I can. And I would be honored to just be part of this team that's not only on the phone today, but the greater team at City Hall to help really address, obviously, all of the important issues that we're faced with today. And many issues that were very important even before we had a virus and before we had the death of George Floyd, but certainly those have brought even more desire on my part to be part of a solution and to do the best I can so that this city can prosper going forward. And again, I just want to say thank you for the consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Rauter, and thank you for your willingness to step up and serve. We greatly appreciate it. With that, we have concluded all items on our agenda for today, and without objection, I'll declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you so much.